All right, everybody, the wait is over, meaning the wait of like, I don't know, a few hours or something. And the epic confrontation, which is not going to be a real confrontation, let's be honest. That's just a little bit of hype, is upon us. And if you are watching on Rockfin, which I also encourage, lovely service, I just need to sometimes wait a few moments to press the go live button. And there we go. And we're off. Okay, so now, where to begin? Well, let's begin with this. And actually, can we just begin with you? So, what is your role on the Majority Report, just so people are aware? Like, how do you describe yourself at this point? I know you're like a weekly, you contribute on Thursdays, or like, what's that?
Right. I worked there as a producer and contributor from 2011 to 2015, and then in 2020, I did some guest roles over the years. But then in 2020, I came back as a weekly host on the Thursday shows.
Okay, very good. And I think we actually might have met in person briefly at one point. So I have nothing personal against you. I actually don't have anything personal against most of the people that I get into contentious exchanges with on the internet.
I agree.
Believe it or not.
We did, by the way, back in 2011 down at Occupy Wall Street.
Yes, that is true. There you go. Fun fact, everybody. It's crazy that was 10 years ago.
All right. Time flies.
But time flies. Yeah, let's just talk about cliches involving the passage of time for this whole stream. How about that?
Right.
So anyway, the Majority Report, Sam Seder, your whole crew, they occasionally like to devote segments to me, which is fine. I guess I'm a public figure, quasi-public figure. I don't mind that at all. In fact, I encourage it, but I generally prefer when whatever criticisms must be leveled, or whenever my critics are moved to raise their objections, my general preference is that it be based on the substance and based on the stuff that I've seen from Majority Report, which gets sent to me. I mean, forgive me, but I'm not a Majority Report subscriber. No offense. I don't really watch many YouTube shows at all frequently.
That's fine.
But people will send me clips or highlights or whatever. And recently, it seems to be a whole lot of stuff involving, I would say, pretty superficial aspects of what I'm doing or reporting or writing or saying. Like you guys have spent a lot of time gossiping about my private life, which I find bizarre. Maybe not you personally, but if you watch that segment from yesterday, it ends with two of the panelists speculating about my girlfriend and stuff, which I guess is funny. But I would maybe have found that funny in 7th grade. So that's a little odd, and I don't fully understand that particular fixation. But more power to you if you all want to fantasize about my private life. I mean, very odd, very very strange behavior, but I guess you're entitled to do it.
I mean, that whole thing is basically a riff on that weird, really out of the blue, quite random Glenn Greenwald tweet where he just happened to say you had a delightful girlfriend, quite without anyone really inquiring or anything like that. So I think people just thought that was funny. Okay. I can guarantee you that your private life would not come up minus that reference.
Okay, well, I suppose I'll take your word for it. But now with 2 weeks of segments that are devoted to me in one way or another, and there's always this riffing happening about, my private, romantic relationships, it does get a little odd. But we can set that aside.
The show, you've been doing something quite interesting that is worthy of talking about, right? I mean, you've been doing this college thing now, and that's certainly long been a fixture of right-wing media. If whether you consider yourself that or not is another story, but that's been like a thing that the right is usually used in their culture wars. And with COVID and the pandemic, and that being your specific angle, and you are someone with 200,000 Twitter followers, a growing Substack, you're on that, your partner on Rumble. You're not a partner on Rumble?
No.
Okay, well, you are someone who is growing in various platforms and becoming, like you said, a more public figure. So I think it's worthy of talking about some of the things you've been talking about.
I agree. I would love to talk about the substance, but it seems to get overwhelmed at times by a very petty and seemingly juvenile fixation on gossip. Which, more power to you if you enjoy gossip.
I
I
mean,
enjoy I enjoy a juicy bit of gossip now and then, just like anybody else. But to be gossiping on YouTube constantly about my girlfriend, that's such an object of fascination. Again, it's weird, and it would never occur to me to gossip on YouTube about Emma Vigilante's private life, whether or not Glenn Greenwald did a cute tweet about it 2 weeks ago. But anyway, we can move on from that. When I watched, when I saw that segment yesterday, what I was mostly struck by was how it was totally unresponsive to anything that I've actually said on this subject. And it was all full of conjecture about, what are my secret motives in terms of trying to carry out some nefarious right-wing grift, or you were speculating that, it's just me kind of subconsciously trying to relive the glory days of when I was in school because I actually wrote down your quote, not that I have a habit of transcribing the majority report, but you said, referring to me, you said they're greatly unhappy with what their lives as is, and they long for the good old days. Now, I mean, I'm fascinated by how you have this psychic ability to probe so deeply into the depths of my entire being and come up with these sweeping judgments about whether I'm pining for the good old days. I mean, did we have like therapy sessions in the past or something, and I've just blacked out and can't remember it? Because if not, I don't know how you would be at all equipped to render judgments such as that. Can you clarify?
Sure. I mean, I don't recall if I said that's you specifically. It's possible I did, but
you were saying they and you were grouping me in this whole they that you were referring to as
right. Because I do think it is a bizarre thing for people to who are many decades removed from attending college to be so infatuated with what goes on college campuses, specifically college campuses. I'm not talking about like what the educational curriculum is or anything like that has long-standing consequences based on what students are taught or mandated to be taught. I'm literally talking about people who have this infatuation with what is happening in college campus student life. It is a bizarre thing to me. And perhaps tonight I will become more informed about why individuals such as yourself are so interested in this. I'm quite interested in learning more, actually, because it does appear to have a through line with the type of person who did quite enjoy college, moves and it doesn't quite move on into the next stage of their life, to be quite honest. I mean, I'm not saying that's you specifically.
Well, but you did say it was me specifically.
I mean,
if you want to talk in generalities about that, personality type which you're positing exists, which I'm sure does exist, fine, but I don't know how you have any of the requisite information to apply that personality type to me. I mean, it's just very strange.
It's just
again, it would never occur to me to say, Matt Binder, because I don't particularly care for whatever he's focusing on in terms of his media platform. That must be attributable to some, deeply rooted, psychological hang up that I'm just going to posit must exist on the basis of nothing. I mean, that would never occur to me to do, just like it would never occur to me to speculate about Emma Vigilante's private life or whatever that other guy's name is private life. So, I mean, I just don't relate to a lot of the like the rhetorical and
I mean,
listen, you guys seem to
if we're talking specifically about you, That is just one type of individual I brought up that you could possibly be. But if you were to ask me the exact type, it was already mentioned when I mentioned that other type of person, so I didn't bring that up either in that segment. But I think you are more likely the type of individual who has just found a nice little niche for yourself. You found that it's quite successful. You have a Substack audience that clearly reacts to this type of subject, and that's why you're pursuing it. That's my belief. You could call it the right wing grift. You could call it a grift in general. You can just call it doing what's best for business, whatever you'd like to call it. I think that's probably more likely who you are. We can talk more about it, and I could find out if you're that other type as well. But that is what I would most likely peg you. And quite a few of the people who are infatuated with college campus life and report on that.
Well, I hope you'll notice that, while that's a fascinating theory, it's still is not addressing the substance, just like the video on Majority Report yesterday was not at all about the substance. It was all this kind of theoretical meta stuff and speculation about what my interior motives allegedly are. And just for the record, I really am not trying to live my glory days of the past. I prefer to be an adult, believe it or not. And not that I had a bad time in school necessarily, but I'm not looking to relive the glory days like the Bruce Springsteen song or something.
All right, so let's talk about the substance. That's why you invited me here, so let's do it.
Well, yeah, but just so you know, I mean, you say that I found one more point on the meta stuff, which has already been raised, so I'm not bringing it up on my own accord. I mean, I've now spent 2 weeks roughly covering this subject, right? 2 weeks in 10 plus years of being in the media has been devoted to college centric issues. And now supposedly it's this whole, contrived grift that I can't possibly be genuinely interested in, according to you and your, fellow panelists. I can't have a good faith reason for taking an interest in this and reporting on it and corresponding with, now huge amounts of people around the country and world on a topic of pertinence. It all has to be a cynical grift. And, that's just very weird because, prior to this 2 week stretch of focusing on this issue, I spent the month of August and early September covering multiple aspects of the Afghanistan withdrawal. And I don't know, was that part of the whole grift? I mean, according to this logic, where everything that I do is dictated by some malevolent desire to just cynically, boost my Substack subscriptions, that would have to have been part of the grift, wouldn't it?
I mean, I can't answer that question. We had this impromptu discussion now. I mean, if I had more time, I probably would have done some research into how long you've covered other topics and how infatuated you became with them and how much you tweeted and Substacked or whatever about them. But I don't have that information in front of me.
Well, you or anybody else is free to go look at my Substack and go look at my tweets from in the month of August of this year, just before I started on this topic. And you'll see that it was overwhelmingly dedicated to the Afghanistan withdrawal, which I guess, according to this whole kind of framework that you're advancing, is part of my secret malevolent grift.
I mean, listen, Michael, there's plenty of times. I mean, I follow you on Twitter, and there's plenty of times I've seen a take from you on issues like Afghanistan that I find myself agreeing on. And then great. I come across, because, I'm an open-minded individual, and then I come across this recent marathon you've been on with the college campus COVID policies. And it's just it's odd to me to see so much about it. Now, you can say you've been on it for 2 weeks, but it's been 2 weeks of or however long it's been of really just nonstop looking into completely inconsequential policies at quite really inconsequential colleges, like colleges that have student bodies of like less than 2,000 or 1,500 students.
Hold on a second. I mean, it's true that I did start out with a fairly marginal and inconsequential college, that would be Connecticut College, but I've since been branching out over the course of these 2 weeks, and I've been covering Stanford, the University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, Amherst, University of Arizona, University of New Mexico, and on and on and on.
Alright.
I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to say that those are not consequential institutions in
I mean, I'm
American
not familiar with
public
all
life.
those schools because
You're not familiar with Stanford or Columbia?
Oh, no, but some of the latter ones you mentioned right there. I'm not familiar with all those schools. I can't tell you how big all of them are, but yes,
Okay,
those
but
are
you're
some
familiar
large
with
schools.
Stanford and
Yes.
Columbia
Yes.
and Brown University.
Yes, but I mean, you yourself have even admitted, I do have this in front of me because I was reading for some of your Substack pieces earlier. Once again, another read through.
Well, hold on. Can I interrupt you really quickly?
Sure.
Because you said that you hadn't done some research. So I'm just wondering if you did do even cursory research before that segment. Not that you're obliged to, but I think I would have thought that it might be smart to. Have you read any of the Substack articles
I've read every single one twice over now because
before the segment yesterday.
The second time before this segment, and then I read them previously when they first came out. No, the first time I read them when they first came out. I even watched.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I even watched the entirety of your the videos. I know not all of them were posted by you, but I saw multiple different videos of from students as well from your Connecticut college appearance, and I listened to what you had to say and what they had to say.
Okay. All right. Well, great. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That wasn't evident, I have to say, in the segment that I watched. It seems like you all were reacting to about 30 seconds of one Tucker Carlson appearance in which I spoke. In that Tucker Carlson appearance, it was actually a truncated segment because of a time crunch, and I spoke for maybe a minute and a half, and yet all these wild extrapolations were made about this whole kind of range of motives that allegedly exist deep within me.
I'm not on every episode of the Majority Report. They had already discussed your Connecticut college appearance and the various opinions you've had about COVID policies. That segment was just really on what was discussed in that Tucker Carlson video, and then obviously the ranting and fun little stuff that we discussed afterwards. I mean, it was not it was just a small segment on a topic that they had already covered much more in prior segments.
The fun little stuff about my girlfriend, right?
It was funny stuff. I didn't even say any of that stuff because I personally do not really care. I do think that they find
I'm glad we can agree on that. I mean, there are a few things I could imagine caring less about than Emma Vigilant or Matt Leck's private affairs.
Sure. But again, it's completely because of that Glenn Greenwald tweet. Like there is not like we've looked into your background and found out you had a girlfriend and decided to riff on it. It is completely bizarre that a third party would just randomly bring up the fact that you have a delightful girlfriend without any, without impromptu, really. Without anyone asking or even raising the question about your relationships or whatever. It's a funny tweet, and that's what the reference is. You are, unfortunately, the individual Glenn Greenwald was talking about. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't be talking about your girlfriend. They'd be talking about that person's girlfriend, quite frankly.
Okay, got it. I got it. So let's move on to the substance. So you assert that these college COVID policies are totally inconsequential. And the reason why I speculated that prior to that segment yesterday, you might not have read my Substack pieces. I'm heartened that you say you have. But the reason why I speculated that you might not have is because I lay out over and over again the express rationale for why I do believe that these issues are of consequence far beyond any direct concern about the living arrangements of students at liberal arts colleges. I have been following this issue and receiving flurries of information from people around the country on this issue because I and many other people, including many of the students themselves at these institutions, right, and faculty actually, they believe that this all could and probably is a harbinger for what's to come in the rest of society. Because I don't think you would deny, would you, that the trends that get incubated at college campuses, especially elite campuses like Brown, Columbia, Stanford, those tend to have a fairly outsized influence on on the rest of society, namely the media, the nonprofit sector, certain kind of swaths of the activist class, and so on and so forth. And I don't know how it's inherently a right-wing observation to note that that obvious reality.
I mean, I would agree on certain issues, like I said earlier, in terms of like education curriculum. I think in terms of dorm life and on campus policies, like how to use the school's gymnasium. I think that is completely unrelated to anything that comes off that college campus. When you leave college, these policies are just, they don't affect you anymore, quite frankly.
All right. Well, I mean, you're referring to a tweet that I did, and I later put it in an article regarding Stanford, where I was given an email notice where the Stanford administrators reminded all aspiring recreational basketball players that they must wear a mask while playing basketball.
Why is that? Why is that important?
It's not important because, you know, a few. Well, hold on. It's not important solely because a few dozen guys at Stanford are probably not going to want to play pickup basketball because they have to wear masks according to university dictates. It's important because of the underlying issue, and the underlying issue has great bearing on what is currently the central public policy issue being debated in the United States, which is issues around residual COVID enforcement policies, the vaccines, vaccine mandates, whether there ought to be vaccine passports. I mean, you'll agree that the whole discussion around, you know, the policy implications of vaccine regulations and laws and orders, and we have now a federal order from Joe Biden requiring the private sector to institute vaccine mandates. You'll agree that that's probably the preeminent public policy issue going on right now.
If these things are already being done, what is the implication of colleges also doing these things?
Well, hold on. I mean, do you agree that that's probably the preeminent public policy debate unfolding right now in the U.S.? Or one of them?
Probably one of them. Sure. Okay. I think it's a silly debate in the midst of a pandemic. But
whether or not you think it's silly, you agree that it's a prominent issue.
Sure. But I also think that the fact that it is a prominent issue and there are these mandates being made right now, it sort of makes your whole argument moot, doesn't it? I mean, what is the influence colleges are going to have on these debates that are already set in stone and happening well before college even came back into session this year?
Well, it's relevant because, for instance, Stanford University is one of the most influential institutions, not just in the United States, but in the world, educationally. Sure. It has an endowment of, I think it was 29 billion, or there may be 39 billion. I might be messing up the exact figure, but, you know, tens of billions of dollars. And so if Stanford University is, even though its student population is universally vaccinated, meaning that the student body has already submitted to the mandatory vaccine requirement, even under that circumstance, if Stanford administrators and the whole public health apparatus around Stanford and Santa Clara County and whatnot, if they are still imposing dictates on the student body that even you, I think, probably would admit are ridiculous. I mean, leave aside whether the basketball regulation is ultimately important. You probably agree that it's kind of silly or maybe not coherent or whatever. Would you?
I mean, I personally cannot attest to either way because I'm not an expert in that area of that field. I'm not a medical expert.
Wait a second. I mean, so you're saying you have to have an official public health or epidemiology credential in order to offer an opinion on a public policy question now? I mean, this has been the dominant public policy question for a year and a half. Well, if it was guided only by experts, then the entire population pretty much would have been left out. So of course we have not just the right, but the obligation, I think, to opine on these issues.
I mean, I can opine with them. I could opine on them with you, and just, you know, if you want.
So opine on that basketball regulation.
Sure. I mean, I'm not attending that college. I don't know what the situation is with that gymnasium. Again, in general, do I think if you're outside, is this an outdoor basketball court?
These are indoor basketball courts.
I mean, I don't see a problem with asking people to put on a mask, to be quite frank.
Well, requiring, not asking. Okay, so
I don't find a requirement of wearing the mask either. I mean, I'm in New York City, where you're required to not only wear a mask but have a vaccine, a vaccination card if you want to go into any sort of public place, whether it be a restaurant or any sort of indoor facility.
But that's the thing, right? They've already mandated the vaccine at Stanford University, just like so many of these other colleges and universities, and yet they are still imposing these arbitrary interventionist policies. Whether it's Columbia, where they're barring students from having visitors, and they're making them submit to this very intrusive contact tracing.
Let me explain
or Stanford, where it's something that's it's kind of silly and trivial, but it's reflective of a mindset that is losing any tethering to coherent reality, when you're saying vaccinated 18 to 22-year-olds cannot play basketball without a mask on, and therefore can't play basketball at all, essentially.
You want my personal take. Okay.
Let me just finish the point.
Sure.
So again, it's not important solely because of the exact regulation at Stanford or wherever else. It's because these incidents, these examples of ridiculous regulations are piling up at some of the country's most elite institutions. And it's significant because it totally contradicts what had been the whole premise behind mass vaccination, which I generally support. I'm personally vaccinated. I've generally advocated that people get vaccinated if they feel like it's the best thing for them to do health-wise. But these arbitrary and capricious regulations undermine the whole concept of the vaccine enabling a return to normalcy. And if the vaccines don't enable a return to normalcy, what will? Are we going to be perpetually in this state of like semi-quasi emergency? And so therefore all these measures, whether they make sense or not, are just going to be deemed justifiable, and you're called a creepy infatuator if you're paying any attention to them? I don't think so. I think it's actually very much worth paying attention to strongly. The mounting evidence.
What do you think?
So many of the country's most powerful and influential institutions are adapting and endorsing this whole paradigm of a permanent emergency scenario. And yes, I do think that has very ominous implications for civil liberties, not just at the campuses themselves, but on a wider societal level.
What do you think the final the game is here then? What do you think the big final outcome that these powers that be are looking for here by asking people to wear a mask? Like, what do you think they're trying to get us to do? Where do you think this is all headed?
Well, I mean, I think you have to be specific about who precisely you're referring to. In the case of college, in a college context or a university context, much of the time it's a confluence of factors. Among those factors are kind of bureaucratic inertia, where because you have these infrastructures built up around COVID policy over the past year and a half, and you have a whole lot of money invested in stuff like the testing regimes and the apps that a lot of these colleges have produced to do your daily symptom check. And there's a whole lot of reputational cachet as well invested in this whole project by administrators. So you have bureaucratic inertia where they can't bring themselves to kind of recalibrate their approach, and it results in these kind of farcical situations, such as no basketball being allowed in Stanford, even though you can go like party down the street, right, indoors without a mask. So it just doesn't make any sense. And I think if we're surrounded by regulations that don't make any sense, that kind of undermines one's ability to have faith in like the rationality of policy making. But also, in addition to that, I do think there's an ideological component where there are administrators, particularly in a place like Santa Clara, California, which was actually the county that Stanford is in, was among the first to introduce a lockdown in March of 2020. So you have a lot of kind of very, I think, misplaced ideological zealotry, where people have this political commitment to imposing the most stringent lockdown or quasi-lockdown measures, regardless of whether at this phase in the COVID cycle they make any public health sense or have a public health logic to them that is intelligible. And they're only doing this because they're immersed in what can only be described as a permanent crisis mentality. So that's why, I was mentioning on the Tucker segment that you guys briefly clipped from, and we're saying, one of the panelists said that I didn't have any facts. I was just giving a vague anecdote. Well, no, I wasn't giving a vague anecdote. I try to opine only if I have a factual basis for what I'm saying. And the factual basis for what I'm saying is that so many of these colleges and universities have a surveillance testing regime, so-called, that students must comply with, or else they face expulsion or other disciplinary measures, right? And what is surveillance testing? Well, number one, surveillance is kind of a creepy term to fold into that, and that doesn't seem to bother a lot of people. And by the way, surveillance testing does have a practical use in certain epidemiological contexts, but not really with an endemic disease that we're going to have to all live with for the foreseeable future. And so when you have these surveillance testing regimes at colleges, they determine what is supposedly an outbreak, oftentimes based on just the slightest uptick in positive test results, even if those test results are asymptomatic, and even or the most mild symptoms among vaccinated young adults, among a population of students who have already been required to get vaccinated. So if those students have already been required to get vaccinated, then go to campus and they're subject to this twice weekly surveillance testing, and they come up with a positive result, and then as a consequence of that, the bureaucrats who kind of preside over them outlandishly overreact, put them in like a semi-lockdown situation, then that's going to be the formula going forward for how other institutions are going to react to what are generally benign instances of transmission. So yeah, I do think that's an important thing to note, and I do think it has it definitely has wider societal implications. You have high schools and middle schools and elementary schools, in the public school system, closing left and right now, because school is now back in session, pretty much everywhere in the country, on the basis of what are being called outbreaks, using the same fallacious logic. So kids in Minneapolis, I was just seeing, in Washington State, in Maryland, so many other places, they're now being put into supposed quarantine, which is not really a quarantine, because most of the kids, especially in inner city areas, don't have the resources to abide by a strict quarantine if they're being told that they're exposed, right? But the point is that it's worthless educational loss now, that long past the time that it has any defensible logic to it. So yeah, I do think that actually is a very important issue. And if colleges are kind of the fulcrum for the perpetuation of this fallacious permanent emergency logic, which I actually do think is analogous in a lot of ways to the post 9/11 period, not because terrorism and a virus are similar in every respect, but because of this mentality of we need maximum safety at all times, and therefore we don't care what kind of intrusive or civil liberties destroying measures are imposed on us if we can aspire toward this unattainable ideal of just total safety under all circumstances. I think that's totally untenable, and I think, yeah, it ought to be covered, and I wish more people were covering it, frankly, other than me.
Michael, we should probably limit our answers to make them a bit shorter so we can break them up.
I apologize.
That's all good. But let me try to address what I do recall here. I mean, Michael, have you talked to any public health officials or medical professionals?
I have, yes.
And about these specific COVID policies on college campuses.
Yep.
Why haven't you included any of these expert opinions in your pieces? I mean, this is reporting apparently, and you put a lot of opinion in there, but your opinion, quite frankly, doesn't make the case like these apparent medical professionals and health experts you spoke to would have.
Well, number one, I think it's kind of presumptuous and even a way elitist to say that you can't render a permissible opinion about the most dominant public policy issue of the day.
Michael,
If you don't have,
Michael, these are health policies though, and I are not health experts.
You're asking if I've spoken to health experts, and the
Right.
answer is yes.
Right.
I don't know if you do, how much journalism you do, and I'm not saying that to be, dismissive or anything, but oftentimes you'll talk to people in what's called off the record contexts. And so therefore, I talk to people on background, and I garner information. And
you could not find a single person who is a medical doctor to give you an on the record comment.
Frankly, I haven't sought out on the record comments from medical doctors on this, but I guarantee you I could find many of them. I've corresponded with, lots of them. I just didn't think that was
how is that not necessary? That would single-handedly give your reporting on your Substack an actual expert opinion. I mean, again, like you or I are not health officials.
I just don't. Well, I don't think everyone is in every circumstance obliged to defer interminably to the supposed expertise of health officials, especially if it stands to reason and it's just commonsensical at this point. There are health experts around the world who have objected to school closure policies at this point. You have countries like Denmark and Ireland and others who don't follow this policy and in fact reject the epidemiological logic of it.
Sure, which
so,
makes
I could talk. If you want, maybe if you really want me to, if you're asking me sincerely, maybe I'll talk to them for the next Substack. That just wasn't my focus for these.
That's pretty.
And I don't know that it's some kind of like sacred requirement to be constantly quoting supposed experts. Lots of whom have been dead wrong about a whole lot and don't need to be quoted. I think it would clutter the articles in a lot of cases.
Are you kidding, Michael? Like, this is journalism 101, man. Like, Journalism
101 is to just passively quote expert opinion and not even do anything investigative, not talk to people on the ground, not report on bureaucratic activity that otherwise would get no attention at all.
What if you went and spoke to some medical experts and they looked at these policies and they said, actually, these make a lot of sense? It would sort of, again, your whole article thrown out the window. You would have no opinion there because people who are in the know and have went to many, many years of schooling to understand these viruses and how they tell you that, hey, your opinion, quite frankly, doesn't muster what you're saying. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think if people are desperate for journalism that just parrots mindlessly, quote unquote, expert opinion, then they have plenty of other avenues to attain that. I think I've provided something different, which is why it's gotten such a big reaction and why people from literally all over the country have sent me information.
I'm sure they do. There's a lot of people who think what you did is journalism. I guess if we're going to somewhere and reporting what people are saying, you could call it journalism. But you said it got a lot of attention, right? Because because people are criticizing it because it's literally you going to a school and just sharing, talking to students and sharing your opinion.
Well, hold on. No. Hold on. Okay, so you're talking specifically about the Connecticut College trip.
Well, that's what people are.
Which is just one component of everything I've done on this for the past 2 weeks. But fine. That was primarily a journalistic trip. It was a journalistic trip in the sense that I was getting flooded with messages from Connecticut College students. And sorry if you've followed my YouTube videos on this already and you've heard me give this spiel several times at this point, but I'll have to repeat it. I went there because students who objected to the administration's policy, which, remember, at the time was probably the most severe lockdown style scenario anywhere in the United States. It was actually reminiscent of Australia in some ways, believe it or not. The students who objected to that policy, whether on practical grounds, whether on moral grounds, political grounds, whatever, they were not able to speak on their own behalf. That's why they were contacting me. I publish Substack articles where I quote them anonymously so people understand that I'm not making it up. And why would I make it up? That's ridiculous.
Michael, are you...
I went there with a journalistic purpose. You might not like it, but I don't know why we have to get into this kind of, tedious semantic debate whether it constitutes genuine journalism. I mean, it's like the majority report this emblem of journalistic integrity or something. I don't get it.
I mean, if the journalistic effort was just to go to a college campus and talk to students about what their opinion on these policies are, that's one thing. Sure, you did an act of journalism there. You did some great reporting to find out what some students on this small liberal college in Connecticut with no more than 2,000 students think about COVID policies. Fine, there you go. But in terms
I had already talked to them. They had already contacted me over the internet.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. My point is, if that was the report you set out to do, a few students at Connecticut College's opinion on COVID policies on the campus, you did it. Congratulations. But that's not what you set out to do. You set out to do this bigger expose on these COVID policies just being a move to authoritarianism and that there's broader implications. But you did not speak to a single, or you did not publish or find someone on the record to attest to that with the experience in that area of health. I mean, it's just that simple. This is not something you or I can say, this is a good policy, this is a bad policy, because we're not experts in that field. We don't have a medical degree. We don't have public health knowledge in terms of what's right for that specific college, what's going on in that community that would require these sorts of policies. I mean, it's just so bizarre to me. Like, this is the thing. You said your piece got a lot of attention. Your piece got a lot of attention because it really is just your opinion and you talking to a few students who share that opinion. If you had spoken to a few medical professionals who backed up your opinion and said, yeah, these policies are kind of overdone, this is not necessary on Connecticut College's campus, I guarantee you people would not be talking about this, because someone with an opinion that matters and has the background to discuss it would have said that, and just would have been like, all right, who am I to deny this person who's an expert in this field?
Well, so you're telling me that there would have been no criticism if I had included quotes from a kind of standard roster of epidemiological experts who wanted to weigh in? I mean, I kind of doubt that.
It would have got a lot less attention because it wouldn't just be your opinion. This is all we have. Michael Tracy's opinion. And who is Michael Tracy? Who is Michael Tracy?
My opinion was grounded in the facts I had gathered, given my conversations with the students and given the information they had sent me in terms of the bureaucratic decrees through, primary source materials. And so if that had to be suffused with expert opinion, I mean, I don't know that that's the type of journalism necessarily that people are desperate for. I mean, you could go to the New York Times or NBC or maybe even the Majority Report and just get, parroted supposed expert opinion all day and night. I was approaching it from a different angle based on the on-the-ground experiences of the students themselves. And again, I also think that there's something very much misguided about saying that you're somehow barred from rendering any opinion at all. You have to just defer to the experts, defer to the public health bureaucrats, defer to people who are ostensibly
Michael, do you got
authority on this subject. I mean, over the course of COVID in the past year and a half, have you not given an opinion on whether it's, mask wearing or any other element of the whole COVID slew of policy debates? You've not given an opinion without specifically citing some public health pronouncement by an alleged expert. Really? You don't have any personal views that you can come to with your own faculties of reason and empiricism?
I mean, you want my personal views? I mean, I have two small children who are under the age of the eligible age or able to get a vaccine. They are 6 and 2 years old. And I know from reading the numerous reports about how COVID is getting worse amongst young children, that they don't have that protection of a vaccine. And so I do worry actually about the various things that go on in the community, in the neighborhood, in the city, in the state, in the country. And so that is something that I am quite concerned about. So when I see public health officials saying, even those who are vaccinated should wear masks because they could still carry COVID-19. And I think about, what if I got it, brought it home, and my 6 and 2-year-old got it? That would concern me very much because they're not vaccinated. I mean, I'm sure that's on the minds of many different health experts. I'm sure that's on the minds of the college administrators who are making these decisions too, that people can go off campus, people can go home, and even if they're vaccinated, spread COVID to people who cannot be vaccinated or choose not to be vaccinated, because whether my opinion on them being dumb or not for not getting vaccinated, that doesn't matter. I still don't want to see them die. So yeah, I do think of all these people, and I do think of the implications that are still out there. Maybe one day when more people are vaccinated and children can all get the vaccine, we can all sit back and if these stringent policies are still out there, we can all sit back and go, all right, now this is ridiculous. But I personally don't quite think we're at that point yet.
All right. Well, I mean, for one thing, I think it's totally contrary to the spirit of free inquiry, or journalistic inquiry for that matter, to say that unless you go and supplicate yourself before like an expert class, you can't contribute anything of value to an ongoing public policy debate. So I reject that. In terms of children, I mean, you're more than entitled, obviously, to have that concern. I mean, I would say that the data overwhelmingly shows that children, and particularly young children, are at astronomically low risk.
Of course.
So therefore, I mean, shouldn't there be a recalibration such that we're not imposing this constant stream of arbitrary measures on people on the basis of a threat that is actually lesser? I mean, for children, I'm not just doing, this is not a right-wing cliche. This is true. For young children, COVID is less severe than many seasons of influenza. That is just true. So unless we are able to reevaluate and put it into a different context and be proportionate, then we're going to be constantly fluctuating around into these bizarre harebrained measures that, yeah, I've shown some examples of at college campuses, but it's not just college campuses. We're now entering a paradigm where a lot of people, because they're not able to rationally calibrate risk any longer, whether it's for ideological reasons or they're just personally paranoid or what have you, and they're not comfortable with the most vulnerable population being 90+% vaccinated, meaning elderly, and they still want to fixate on these potentialities of risk, which I have to say have been largely overblown, and use that as a basis to welcome ridiculous, surveillance tactics.
I mean, 2,000 people per day are dying of COVID in this country right now, Michael. I mean, that's the average right now. That's a lot. That's a lot. And we could talk.
And who are they? I mean, they're generally older people who have not been vaccinated, which, I mean, it does not apply to young children.
That's not true either. You're seeing people now in their 20s, 30s, teens, even, like I said, the numbers, young children was low, but it's getting larger now. And again, like, we can talk about these numbers. 2,000 people, and maybe it's just, every day a dozen of them, maybe just a dozen of them are children. But if it's your kid, that kid's not a number. If that's your grandma or grandpa, that grandma or grandpa is not just a number. Like, these things mean things to people. Like, we could just talk about the numbers all day, but that individual who dies is a somebody to their family and their friends. And I think 2,000 is a lot. I don't think it's like, maybe if we get to a point where, like, a handful of people are dying of COVID a day, or a little bit more than that a week, then we could be like, okay, we can't. Let's continue on. This is now at the levels of other diseases, communicable diseases in this country, but we're not there, Michael. 2,000 people are not dying from any other communicable diseases right now. It's just COVID.
Well, much to the chagrin of many of my more right-wing and libertarian followers, and there could be some people in the chat right now who can attest to this, for about a year, I was more on the COVID hawkish side, in that I personally abided by many regulations, maybe that I didn't fully, I couldn't fully affirm the efficacy of, but I did it as just a matter of sustaining societal cohesion. And so I wore the masks without much objection. I accepted the stay-at-home orders early on, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think actually we should probably at some point go back and reevaluate the logic behind all of that. But that's sort of a separate issue. The issue now, and why I'm no longer willing to make allowances, as I have been in the past, for demonstrably arbitrary and capricious policies, is because we were supposed to have an exit path. The vaccines were supposed to enable a resumption of normalcy, and they're not, because people are still using an outmoded metric to determine the severity of the COVID threat, and that's this whole concept of cases. That's why I was on Tucker Carlson articulating the inanity of being on a college campus with 99% vaccinated students and imposing on them mandatory surveillance testing, which overwhelmingly is only detecting benign cases. Because transmissibility can no longer be the barometer for dictating public policy anymore. Otherwise, this is going to be what we're stuck with forever, because it's an endemic disease. And so that I think is a whole kind of system of thought that needs to be revisited, and it's just not. And so, I think colleges are the ground zero for why it's not.
I disagree with that, because again, like I said, this has been going on before college came back into session this semester. I agree with you that it seems like you fell for the absolute failure in messaging from, can't speak for other countries, but this country's, the government's messaging on this. There was truly a failure in the messaging and how it was relayed to people on what was going to happen once the vaccines were rolled out. I mean, clearly there was a huge failure there. I have for many months criticized Dr. Fauci and the CDC and the public information out there for their messaging. It was horrendous. The idea that they told people back in May that you didn't have to wear masks for certain things anymore, and that when the vaccines were coming out and everything was going to change, I thought it was a dumb move, because I've been reporting on how these different conspiracy theories and what the messaging was amongst people on Facebook and Twitter, the regular, ordinary, everyday people, on how they were viewing these things. And I saw that, hey, we're not going to get back to normal as quickly as you think, because there's going to be pushback against these vaccines. I mean, for anyone who didn't think that, was just blind to the discourse and what's been going on for the past year and a half. And so there was a total messaging failure there by them. But you're a smart enough guy, and you should see that things changed on the ground. Things were getting better with COVID as the vaccines were rolled out. But then the vaccination rates came to a halt. They weren't growing as much. People were turning them down. And then we saw that downward trend of COVID started to inch its way back up, and it went from an inch to, we're almost at another peak here. We might even blow away the previous peak in terms of the number of cases and possibly even the number of deaths. Some states have done so. Some states are going through the worst of COVID-19, both cases and deaths, period, from the past since March 2020. I mean, we're not out of the woodwork yet. Some states are doing a lot better. New York is doing a lot better from where it was at its worst, excuse me. But other states are not. And so things change when it comes to diseases and vaccines and how these things work. I mean, the science isn't settled just because things go in the way, quite honestly. The way people took this information and felt like it was going to be set in stone is just not how this works. As more data comes in, as things change on the ground, we have to update ourselves based on the science. And we're seeing what happened. I mean, we have to go back to wearing masks in certain situations, which is unfortunate, because it would have been easier to never leave doing that. We should have kept doing it just so it was easier for people to not get used to not doing it anymore, to be quite frank. But it is what it is, and this is where we are now. To think that, I don't think that the situation was perfectly handled whatsoever. And I've been criticizing Fauci since back in like February of 2020, actually, when he came out and said the stupid thing about how, yeah, people don't need masks. And then they later came out and said, oh yeah, that was the messaging because we were worried about there not being enough PPE for like, doctors and nurses at hospitals while they were dealing with all these influx of COVID patients in ICUs and emergency rooms. How stupid to lie to people just to do that. They should have been truthful from the start when it came to why they said you didn't need masks. And quite frankly, I think maybe we wouldn't even be having this discussion about masks because people wouldn't have had the idea from the beginning that, oh, they don't work or whatever. It's just been dumb from the get-go. So if you think, maybe you agree with me there and that's where we can agree. But,
okay, but maybe there was a messaging failure having to do with vaccines, but my attitude wasn't shaped by a purported messaging failure. My attitude was shaped by other things that I could observe, which is that the vaccines actually have been found to greatly reduce the likelihood that one will undergo a severe health outcome if they contract COVID, right? So
right.
That even though the vaccines do not totally prevent transmission, they do very much mitigate the number one thing that we were all supposedly concerned about, which is that, old people dying and the health systems being overrun and so on and so forth. But that's now dissipated somehow as the barometer for how we're dictating current policy. Now we're concerned with transmissibility for its own sake. And we're using asymptomatic cases of people who have no symptoms at all as somehow a metric for COVID being a massive problem. And that's the wrong framework at this point. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think there has to be a very serious reevaluation of that whole paradigm, or else we're going to be stuck once again in this permanent crisis mentality, because it's an endemic disease. There is no way to fully suppress transmission. So what? I mean, the next time there's like a minor variant in 2 months, we're all gonna light our hair on fire once more. I think. Well, it's a totally unsustainable mentality.
I don't think this is a minor variant.
That unsustainable mentality is being incubated at colleges and universities, hence the ridiculously arbitrary measures that they're imposing on students. And also, you mentioned your kids, and I'm not going to obviously make any judgment on what you're doing for your own kids' safety, but there's almost no evidence, or virtually zero evidence, that these kind of piecemeal strictures imposed at like Columbia University are somehow going to prevent transmission on such a scale as to be, defensible in terms of policy. So there's no reason to think that these lockdown measures, or these kind of like, quasi lockdown measures, are actually going to achieve what their supposed stated purpose is, which is to reduce transmission, leaving aside whether reducing transmission is even a tenable aspiration anymore, which I don't think it is.
I mean, all it would take would be one professor, one janitor, one cafeteria worker to, contract COVID and bring it home, and one of their family members gets sick and dies. I mean, that's enough to me.
But hold on. I mean, so this is why I think that mass provision of vaccines, which actually was I think a fairly solid public policy success in the U.S. in terms of, the manufacture and distribution, not that everybody's automatically accepted uptake of them, which they haven't, but the policy underlying that mass provision, I think, was rather successful. The reason why I have to insist that that's a pivot point, and this is what led me to developing an interest in the college policies, is because that theoretical person that you mentioned, the janitor or whomever, who could contract the disease, well, guess what? They've had 8 months to get a vaccine that drastically reduces their likelihood of having a severe outcome. So how is that not a reason to then reframe this whole issue. If the people who want the vaccine, or let's say they're even mandated to get that vaccine, if all those people are at drastically lesser risk from the virus, shouldn't that be cause to not just kind of mindlessly acquiesce to ridiculous impositions that severely diminish the quality of life for a lot of people, including school-age kids who at this very moment are in this involuntary kind of quarantine scenario in a lot of states in the country, and are being deprived of learning 18 months later in some cases, when many of them have not been in school at all. I think the cost-benefit analysis is totally warped if you're still operating within like a March 2020 mentality.
The cost-benefit analysis, I mean, you look at masks as wearing a mask, like a little face mask, as a quality of life issue. I mean, the cost-benefit analysis is wear this thing on your face that you probably will forget you're even wearing throughout the day, and then we will it'll be much less likely that someone will even vaccinated, contract COVID, bring it home, and have their small child or an elderly family member who they live with die of COVID. I mean, the cost-benefit analysis.
But again, the family member and elderly person have had vaccine access for 8 months. So how can that be the critical factor now that must determine everything? If they've had the ability to insulate themselves from the worst outcome from this disease, thanks to a socialized medicine program that, by the way, was generously instituted by Donald J. Trump. Just saying. I'm not making a broader point with that, really.
Hey,
but I'm not even referring.
Someone should tell his supporters that.
I know. I've tried.
I mean,
I've made the point.
I mean, maybe he should do a better job doing that too. I mean, if he cares about them so much.
If you're a longtime Substack reader, you know that I've made that point many times. But also, I'm not even really referring to the mask policies so much as diminishing quality of life, although I think there are actually genuine instances where that is the case. I'm talking about the general deprivation of social experience in college campuses in particular, where it just makes no sense. If you're a college freshman, hold on. If you're a college freshman now, right? And most likely your senior year of high school was essentially negated because of COVID, right? So now you're into your first semester in college, and all of a sudden, on totally arbitrary grounds, on grounds that don't pass any kind of rational scrutiny test, you are being confined to your room. You're being told you cannot attend parties. You're being told you cannot go to bars and restaurants. In many cases, you're still not having in-person classes. You're being, saying you can't host guests. You can't even just do normal stuff to make friends. I mean, that was the policy more or less explicitly at Brown University. Okay, so yeah, while I don't think anybody should spend a whole lot of time, mourning for very privileged, quote unquote, students attending these elite colleges, that is a cost. And, the cost might be defensible if it actually had a defensible logic to it, but it just doesn't most of the time.
I mean,
reduced transmission.
I mean, I don't care about people's college experiences. They won't care about their college experience in a few years when they're out of college. I don't look back on my college experience, and I have no problem.
Hold
on.
It
just really is so constant. Like this is
this
is what we talked about in the segment. This was the crux of the situation here. Did not, you and me talking about health policies when we really neither of us have any experience talking about that with any sort of expertise. This is the thing, though. Like, I personally do not care about your college experience if you're at college right now. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's not an issue that I would go out and report on. It's just so inconsequential. And then B, there are completely nonsensical, arbitrary policies that colleges and all sorts of schools institute on a regular basis when there was no COVID. There's schools that have uniforms. There's been schools that deem that you can't bring guests to your dorm room. This is not something new. Like, the idea that these policies are just new and they're all of a sudden tyranny on students. You go to a school, you look into what their policies are, their campus life measures, and all these other sorts of things. These are all things they deem, and if you don't like it, just don't go to that school. And when you
Hold
do
on, okay,
go, it just is what.
hold
Go
on.
ahead.
And as I've tried to emphasize, and which was not recognized at all in this segment yesterday, is that while that the primary motive for me covering this subject is because of what I contend are the wider societal ramifications. And maybe you reject that there are any wider societal ramifications, but I contend that there are, and that's the principal reason I'm covering it. But there also is a dimension where I think it's actually reflective of maybe a lack of empathy or something. If you're just saying, I don't care about this, nobody should care about this. They're not going to care that some of the formative years of their social and academic development were deprived of them on totally nonsensical grounds. I mean, that seems almost a little crass, right? I mean, the school closures, the school closures. Oh, okay. So I mean, would you say the same for like high school or middle school? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I personally think anyone.
Wait. So if someone, if a school child, like say an 8th grader's development has been stunted, which there is evidence is probably the case due to school closures, you're just going to kind of say that doesn't matter. I mean, I think that actually does matter in a pretty direct sense, in that it's harming.
I mean,
I
think
the cognitive and social development of people during a developmentally formative stage.
As for 8th graders, I'm sure they loved the last year when they didn't have to go to school and just hanging out with their friends playing video games. I think that probably was a great time for them.
I mean, there are probably some who felt that way, but there are a lot of people who were deprived of critical social opportunities that are probably long-lasting impacts throughout their entire life. So I think it's kind of crude, actually, to just dismiss the importance of that. So then, why not close down all schools forever if it just doesn't matter and people feel like, prefer to sit around playing video games?
Hey,
I mean,
but we're not talking about.
Let's just abolish public education. I mean,
but we're not
talking.
Matter. But see, we're not talking about that.
It's very nihilistic.
We're talking about temporary measures. We're talking 1 year where schools were closed, basically. Things like that happen. There were things done in its place. There were Zoom classes. Now, like I mentioned, I have kids. I don't want to keep bringing them up. But again, you want my personal opinion on things, then my personal opinion is based on these experiences. Excuse me. I have a kid who during the lockdown was in kindergarten, and I could see during that time period that that's a crucial age for socialization. 8th graders could go online and socialize with their friends, pick up the phone, talk for hours, do video chats. So I think they were fine. Probably a lot of kids younger than that, and certainly kids older than that too. But there definitely was. This is a subsection of children, probably from 4 to 6, 7, maybe 8, who don't do those things. And so basically they were home and probably were bored for a little bit. And they probably lost some socialization skills or will be delayed in that aspect. I've seen it myself, and my son's back in school and he's already hanging out with his friends. So it looks like from my point of view, so far so good, but I'm totally open to the fact that there are ramifications there. But we're talking about very young children, but that's not what you're talking about. I think when we're talking, junior high school, college, those kids are fine. And this is just a situation that they're going to get to grow up and talk about and say, hey, I went to school during this crazy year and a half, 2 years where this pandemic came. Other generations have lived through crazy moments too, where everything changed. Maybe policies were differed. When I was in high school, 9/11 happened, and I saw a quick change in the way society acted before and after, which affected how me and my friends hung out after school and on the weekends. This is just the reality of life, and we all need to evolve with the situations that confront us. And kids will evolve in that way too. A lot of the things I see from people with your opinion.
Hold on. Can I
well, let me just finish here. A lot of the things, one of the main topics I see from people with your position is the mandate that 2-year-olds wear masks.
Well, I mean, you don't think that's preposterous in New York? There's no other jurisdiction essentially in the entire world which requires that. But somehow in New York, it's of paramount epidemiological necessity to make 2-year-old toddlers in daycares wear masks while
Listen,
they're crying and fussing.
I have a 2-year-old. Well before this was a mandate, well before we bought her a mask, she was asking because she saw me and her mother wear the mask. I want a mask. Where's my mask? I want to wear a mask. And every day she asks for the mask. Kids do not care. This does not affect them. She's 2. She was a baby a couple of months before the pandemic. She grew up during it. This is normal to her. This is not anything crazy. She'll grow up completely fine. When we lose the masks, we lose the masks. But for her, wearing a mask, not a big deal. I'm going to assume other 2-year-olds agree with that.
Aren't you over extrapolating from your own individual experience there? I mean, do you think that should be required of everyone else, regardless of how they feel about it? Or I mean, there must be some 2-year-olds, wouldn't you think, who actually do have an adverse outcome as a result of being enforced to wear masks
I would say if those 2-year-olds' parents
why is it that there's no other country that does this? I mean, doesn't that cause you
to
at least be a little bit skeptical about the utility of it?
That seems like a good place for someone who is educated on the health risks and benefits to come in.
I don't need to do this constant routine of appealing to experts to tell you that most countries do not impose such a thing, including many countries that were even more restrictive than the U.S. in their lockdown, like UK, Ireland, France, and so on. I mean, they don't do this.
I can't.
Somehow, Governor Kathy Hochul has like the smartest experts on her Rolodex.
I can't answer that. What I can tell you is that you asked a question about if I think there are 2-year-olds who hate wearing masks. And I would tell you, yeah, there probably are. And you know why there are 2-year-olds who hate masks? Because they saw their big baby parents complaining about wearing masks. Because the 2-year-old who just saw their parents wearing a mask and just doing what they need to do, no big deal, they wouldn't care. And they would just wear the mask too. I mean, the example I have is that I have a 2-year-old who saw her parents wear masks and she was fine wearing it. 2-year-olds don't really have opinions on the pandemic. They basically copy whatever their parents do because that's where their experience lies. If mommy or daddy says this is good or mommy and daddy's doing it, then I want to do it. It's that simple.
Well, okay. So again, you're of the mind that in New York State alone, the experts that Kathy Hochul consults are so sagacious, so brilliant that they're just leagues beyond everybody else in the entire world, and they know that it's somehow of epidemiological necessity to require all 2-year-olds at public daycare facilities to wear masks. Okay, well, that's your view. I just wanted to respond to something else that you said. I think there was sort of like a fatalism in your whole attitude toward just kind of accepting that, there's this abnormality that a lot of people just have to accommodate themselves to. And so what, maybe in a few years, they won't care about it. What are you going to do? I mean, that is sort of a fatalistic attitude. And I actually think that such fatalism is kind of also embodied in a lot of these burgeoning bureaucracies that enforce COVID policy. Because they're also saying that this is fine, where we have this whole kind of architecture set up, oftentimes funded by private capital to make you submit to these constant intrusive tests and then contact trace you for an endemic disease, so we can then figure out what bars and restaurants you went to, and then send emails scolding you for patronizing such bars and restaurants, and maybe even subject you to disciplinary interventions. All this stuff is just okay because sometimes life just gives you lemons and you got to make lemonade. I mean, that's a fatalistic attitude that I think if subscribed to, excuses nonsensical policymaking, and just kind of general attitudes toward COVID that no longer make any sense. And so therefore I think it's actually incumbent upon us to not defer kind of mindlessly to that fatalistic outlook, because there's stuff that can be done to depart from it when it's no longer necessary, or at least no longer passes any kind of rational test.
I mean, I honestly
I want to ask you a question. So the whole premise for this discussion was that I'm creepily infatuated with colleges, right? I mean, do you think that paying any attention to the policies being kind of fermented on these campuses, which are going to kind of inculcate the students attending them, who are especially at elite colleges, later going to run nonprofits and get elected to office and, control a lot of the most powerful mechanisms of society. Do you not think that their submission, sometimes against their will, but sometimes because they're demanding it, because there is a faction, as you know, of students who are very aggressively in favor of their own college administrators and actually want to be subjected to more restrictions. So they're actually demanding to be controlled by the bureaucrats who preside over them. Do you not think that this actually has some pretty significant societal ramifications? Like, even if you disagree with me on the scope of it, or you think that maybe I'm overstating certain parts of it, do you think that the only reason one might take an interest in this and try to do reporting on it and writing on it and talk to people who are affected by it, do you think that could only be because I have a creepy infatuation, or could there actually be some good faith reason why I might be doing it that isn't just a grift, or isn't just because I'm cynical, but actually because I do detect a real trend here that of larger societal consequence?
I mean, it's possible that's what you believe, and that's why you're going this route.
Well, I do believe it. I'm telling you, I believe it. You can disbelieve me when I say that, but I don't know what basis you'd have to call me a liar.
I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying that could be the case. I mean, you're telling me it is, and it's very well could be one facet, of it. It couldn't. I don't know. I'm not going to extrapolate there as you're on the phone with me, telling me, on the stream with me, telling me the case. But I can tell you that, as to your question, I mean, I really do not think that any of these campus student life policies that you've been focused on really go beyond what's going on in these schools, quite frankly. I don't see how a student who has to wear their mask on the basketball court, or a student who has to wear their mask in class, or a student who temporarily could not invite
can't drink water in a 90-minute lecture because even removing one's mask for maybe 2 seconds is seen as some kind of menace that's going to cause thousands of deaths, stuff like that.
I mean, I just don't. Listen, is the fact that you can't drink water?
I guess maybe what differentiates me from you is that I do have a visceral reaction to what I see as capricious impositions that just have no grounding in any kind of logic. Yeah,
a lot of non-COVID school policies really, honestly, don't have any logic to people outside the school either. I mean, do uniforms make sense? Yet some schools require uniforms. I mean, I personally don't think that's necessary. But if a college decides they want their students uniforms, then.
But school, you're talking about colleges that require uniforms. Which colleges require uniforms? I guess this is an aside.
Let's bring up randomly, because this is one school I know that does have a dress code, whether it's a uniform or not. I don't think it's quite a uniform, but there's a dress code. Liberty University, a favorite amongst conservatives. A lot of very powerful. You look at their alumni list. A lot of people in office from Liberty University.
That's sure. I've actually been to Liberty University, and I find it interesting, and I've reported on it. So I don't disagree with you there that it's actually a fascinating thing to devote attention to. But hold on. This whole analogy to uniforms, I think, is asinine. Uniforms are not imposed at Liberty University, or more often at private secondary schools, because on the basis of an appeal to a public health emergency. It's because of whatever the kind of Baroque institutional culture issues there are going on. So I don't see how that's relevant at all, or how that kind of undermines the legitimacy of my focusing on an issue that has direct bearing on a public policy question that affects the entire world. The entire world is not affected by some,
the entire
private
world
school
requiring
uniforms.
The entire world is not affected by Connecticut College saying, wait till after the lecture to take a sip of water.
The entire, well, actually, not that it matters, I guess, but that was at Georgetown and USC and UC Berkeley.
Again,
you can kind of hand wave it, but Georgetown and USC and UC Berkeley, kind of influential places, but so it's not just about Connecticut College, even though that was the first place that I happened to focus on. But I'm not. What I'm saying is, everybody is affected by the public policy measures and just the general social attitudes that exist around COVID. Whereas that's just not the case, whatever, with what private schools choose to do in terms of requiring dress codes. So I guess I just don't understand the analogy.
I mean, my point is that basically all of these college campus policies are just arbitrary. I mean, to care about them,
we agree. They are arbitrary. So we're in agreement.
So so I don't really understand why you care so much about them, because there really is no difference in my opinion. Well, the one difference actually is the fact that one is for the health of the communities and for the students, and others are just basically for people to obey certain cultural norms on the college campus. Yet the ones you seem to have a problem with are those health policies, quite frankly. I mean, to discuss these issues in general seems so nonsensical to me. Like, if a college believes, based on whatever data they have, because I can assure you that some random is not just walking into the college and saying, I just don't want students to drink water for 90-minute lectures. I mean, clearly that's coming from somewhere that makes sense to someone who has know-how in how that could be an issue.
And so therefore, what the journalistic imperative is then to just defer to the so-called know-how of these faceless bureaucrats who are claiming that they have this amazing expertise, and they know that removing a mask for 2 seconds to hydrate yourself briefly in a class is going to cause mass murder or something. I mean, that's
no one's saying mass murder, but I mean, again, this would be a great question to ask one of those health experts that you would speak to for a piece like this. I mean, again, like,
I think your appeal to expertise is actually pretty tedious, but because you can go read expert opinion in any media venue you want all the time. I'm adding something.
But different. Why wouldn't you seek out an expert that agrees with you though?
Well,
why wouldn't you even do that?
Number one, I have. I
spoke
to one last night.
Who and what did they say?
Well, I mean, once again, I talked to people off the record. I mean, I probably could get a quote from that person if I saw it. But I didn't.
It's super bizarre to me that a journalist just continues to agree to all of these off the record conversations with these experts.
Really?
That would
have you? I mean, I don't know if you consider yourself a journalist or not. Not that you have to, or it's some kind of moral good. But I mean, if you do, you've never had an off the record or background.
Oh, I've had off the records before, and in situations where if you're reporting on a company and that one specific company will only give you an off the record, sure, I guess there's nowhere else to turn unless you find a whistleblower in the company or someone willing to speak out. But in general terms, if you're talking about something where you can find experts in multiple different areas, you can generally find someone to talk to you about. Like, it's not like there is one company or even just a handful of companies that have a monopoly over health expertise or epidemiology or pandemics. Like, you could find a number of experts who would go to on the record with these sorts of beliefs, and it's weird to me that you can't apparently find one to put in your piece. Quite frankly, I mean,
it's not. I haven't sought them because I'm not. What I'm producing is not kind of oriented around how many experts I can quote and somehow and just defer to mindlessly. I mean, that's not my approach. I mean, if that's your main criticism, then I guess I'm good to go, because I could easily do that tomorrow if I wanted to. And maybe I will. Maybe it's not a bad thing to add to my repertoire. I mean, it frankly hadn't even really occurred to me, because I'm not pretending to be an epidemiological expert. I'm approaching this journalistically by highlighting the experiences of people that would otherwise not get any publicity and not
right. But none of those students are talking about this is a greater This is those students are talking about the shittiness.
Well, yes, they are actually. I mean, a lot of them are. I mean, I've heard from them, and they agree.
There are students telling you.
I have heard from students who say that they fully agree. I mean, I'm not going to name them right now, but I'm saying I have heard from students who agree with the thrust of my larger analysis of why these measures, which you seem to agree with me are largely arbitrary, actually do have wider societal ramifications. And tell me if you disagree with this. I mean, one reason that I've constantly gone back to these measures having wider societal implications is because if you gaze out at the country's most, a solid group of the country's most elite and influential institutions. Again, I don't want to be repetitive, but UC Berkeley, Stanford, Georgetown, Brown, Columbia, the list goes on, right? I mean, those are some pretty powerful institutions, and they're all operating. Duke, another one. So it's not just on the coast either. If they're all operating under this paradigm of a permanent emergency status associated with COVID, and they're habituating their student population to just acquiesce to that, even if it means that they have to sacrifice.
Why do you keep saying permanent though, when there's no proof that these are permanent? I mean,
because the logic that they're operating under, if they're so fixated on transmission, even benign transmission, and that means these surveillance regimes are going to stay seemingly forever. I mean, I would love to. I mean, and I hope I'm wrong, but I would love to talk to you a year from now, and then we can see if these surveillance regimes that have been instituted have been dismantled, or if there's suddenly going to be another purpose used to them. Because, and my guess is that it's probably going to be the latter, because you may not know this, and actually this is something that I'm working on for next week. There's a ton of money wrapped up in sustaining the permanence of these so-called surveillance testing regimes, even if they cease to have any utility on epidemiological grounds. So yeah, I mean, I actually do think that whole kind of structure around COVID mitigation is going to get implanted as a permanent or at least semi-permanent fixture of ordinary life. And it's going to have consequences for society's ability to exercise their liberty in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that from a knee-jerk libertarian standpoint. As I was saying before, I willingly, maybe reluctantly, but I willingly kind of acceded to some of these COVID measures earlier on. But I think at a certain point, if you don't recalibrate, then it's like a frog boiling in water, right? I mean, you gradually allow for the imposition of measures that erode your freedoms. And that's what was done after 9/11. Again, different circumstances. Yes, I acknowledge that. But it's a similar.
I don't think it's similar at all.
But what is analogous is that mentality where one is willing to accept a new paradigm foisted upon them, even if the premises of it are fallacious. I mean, this idea that terrorism after 9/11 was the number one threat that everybody had to wake up every morning caring about, to the point of paranoia and undue stress, was fallacious. And likewise, I think that the idea that everybody has to wake up every morning, even if you're vaccinated and you're 19 years old, and COVID has to be the number one thing on your mind, I think all that's doing now is counterproductive. It's creating hypochondria and paranoia on faulty premises. And it's also, yes, going to be used, I think is inevitable, to restrict freedoms and liberties. I mean, you have colleges all around the country now requiring that you, and this is, I documented this at UC Irvine, University of Michigan, University of Pennsylvania, where you're in order to just enter facilities, right? You have to load onto your phone an app where you fill out your daily health information, and then that's checked by who's ever checking it, and it gets vacuumed up into this database where we don't know what the privacy regulations are around those databases for the most part. And I mean, yeah, if this is
Michael, when you say
ubiquitous to colleges and universities, the most influential in the country, you don't think that's going to be proposed in New York or New Jersey sometime?
When you say daily health information, Michael, I know what you're talking about, because I fill out one of those forms every day for my son to attend school. It literally just asks, How are you feeling? Did you wake up today not feeling, having any of these symptoms, which are COVID symptoms? Were you around anyone who's been COVID positive? Very basic stuff. This isn't telling anything to anyone. You can't even extrapolate this information to find out. They're not asking you like for hereditary diseases or, what medications you're taking, so they could somehow find out what other, health issues you have. It's literally just, did you have COVID? Yes or no? No. Come to school. Anyone in your family have COVID? No. Yes or no? Come to school. It's like the basic shit. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. We're not talking about surveillance. Like, listen, if you told me that there was an app out there that was tracking every single person's movements in order to do
there actually
contact tracing.
There actually are such apps. I mean, I was just
all right. Tell me about them then. I mean, because those I'll listen to in terms of having a problem with, because I think those do, sure, you want it, but that seems like a very specific thing, and it's not at all in the same realm. It's not, you can't even put it in the same conversation.
Well, look up. I mean, if you're curious, look up Drexel University, where there's actually a whole controversy over this, where they contracted with a private company to develop this app, and it turned out that geolocation advice was being geolocation data was being collected, and there was very little reason to believe that it was actually being handled in a way that was conscious of privacy rights.
Sure, I have a problem with that, and that should probably be the things like that should be the complete focus of someone who's covering this type of stuff.
Okay, so hold on. So if that's bad at a college, why is it bad? I mean, aren't I just being infatuated with college if I focus on something which you now agree is actually harmful? I mean,
no,
why should I focus on that if it's limited to a college? I mean, the whole conversation was premised on that it's weird and creepy to be infatuated with colleges in the first place.
You have a really, listen, if something was to happen at a college that was not based on it being in the realm of just that college, then sure, I have a problem with it. If you're telling me that like some big tech company is all of a sudden going into a college and downloading apps on everyone's phone that tracks their every single move on or off campus, and it does that regardless of not whatever COVID measure or whatever, sure, that's a problem, because that's not a college campus issue. I'm telling you,
let's say, hold on a second. I told you that at Drexel University, there was this controversy over the potential privacy violations of the app that had been developed in order to facilitate symptom checks and contact tracing, right? And you agreed with me that that was a bad thing and should be looked into. So, but let's say it was only limited to Drexel University and you couldn't draw a direct through line between that app situation there and what was taking place elsewhere. You're saying would it be justified or not to focus on Drexel University, even though you're just focusing on a college and it could be a creepy infatuation?
Well, the problem is that Drexel University, according to what you're telling me, has contracted an outside company, which of course can then use this technology elsewhere. Now, Drexel University just said, hey, log into the school system and insert this information. That's a lot different, because that's not going to be extrapolated via a big corporation.
But if there was a discernible harm that you and I agree exists at Drexel University, would it or would it not be justified to focus on it, even though that harm is limited to what's going on at the university and what's happening to the student body?
I just told you it's not limited to the university, though, because if the app tracks you on university grounds, it'll track you off university grounds too.
But I'm not talking about the geography. I'm talking about the harms are limited to the student body. Like you're saying we shouldn't care, or it's weird or creepy to care about student life. Right. So, but that impinges only on student life of the Drexel population. So why would it be somehow warranted to care about that, but not care about other things, which also could have downstream effects on the rest of society? I mean, I don't get where you're drawing the line.
Well, the line is being drawn on what is a college campus issue and what is just something that is happening on a college that can also help elsewhere.
Okay,
If someone goes and shoots up a college campus, that's not a college campus issue. That's a gun issue. That's various other issues. Not wearing a mask at one specific college is, whether you can or cannot wear a mask, or are mandated to wear a mask at one specific basketball court or in one specific school's classes, or whether you can drink water during a 90-minute lecture at one college or not. That's a student life issue. Whether you can have a dorm room party, that's not something that has consequences outside of the college campus.
Well, we agree in this case of Drexel, it does have consequences outside the campus, even though
because it's not a campus. Because it's not,
even though the harms are limited to the student body, the people who actually are required to install the app and have their data tracked, right? So I guess where we depart is, I think, other issues, even if they're less severe, such as capricious mask policies that forbid students ridiculously from taking a sip of water in a 90-minute class, or even the more extreme policies like confining students to residences and not allowing them to go to bars and restaurants, or needing a permission slip like at Amherst College to even travel off campus. I think that should be understood as in the same kind of category as the Drexel scenario. I
guess that's where I disagree.
In that it's all reflective of an inability or refusal to recalibrate the paradigm for understanding what the threat of COVID is. And if that recalibration never happens, then I think we're all consigned to a permanent emergency situation. And that's going to corrode civil liberties. And it's also going to have all kinds of other harmful downstream effects. And if you don't agree with that, okay, fine, we could have a legitimate debate. But I would hope you would at least acknowledge that I'm putting forward an intelligible case for why I feel that way, and it's not just a matter of me being creepily infatuated with colleges.
I mean, I don't think it's the same at all, and I don't think it's even close. The fact that a private company could have the location and can track basically people via this application has huge implications. That, quite simply, telling someone that they can't have people over temporarily for a certain period of time in their dorms, it's not even equivalent, to be quite frank. One is a general civil liberties issue. Another one is a student life issue at a college campus. I mean, I don't know how else to explain. Perhaps other people will agree with you that there is no difference. I think there is quite a large difference.
I'm not saying there's no difference, or I'm not saying that these things are all equivalent. I'm saying they're all a function of what now I think has to be deemed a wrongful mindset in how COVID is understood. I mean, not to repeat myself, but if you're using cases, even cases that are benign and asymptomatic, as your metric for gauging the status of COVID in all these places, despite it being an endemic disease, then that's going to give you license to impose a whole variety of unfounded measures, whether they're more harmful, such as the privacy violating cases, or whether they're less harmful, like a mask mandate or something. And actually, the whole contact tracing regime that a lot of students are subject to is privacy violating. They are required to give up, to sometimes it's already automatically tracked where their movements have been, if they have one of these app systems, but also they're interrogated and required by their disciplinary code to reveal where they've been and have their movements traced, and then have that adjudicated before some kind of judicial body. I mean, I do think that actually is also, in a way, a privacy violation. And if it's happening over and over again at all these elite institutions, I don't know how anybody in their right mind can be comfortable in believing that none of this is ever going to have any kind of effect on institutions that govern and dictate the lives of everybody else in society. I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that it will.
And I just don't think what happens at college.
That's what drives my interest.
I just don't think what happens at colleges in terms of campus life policy has.
You say campus life policy, which trivializes it. I'm saying COVID policy. Which has bearing on public policy.
But it doesn't because the public policy comes first. This isn't a chicken or the egg scenario, though. The public policy has been out there. Colleges are basically following, for the most part, what's already out there, and maybe from what you found yourself, they add some additional measures based on specific attributes that particular college has. But it's not like they're mandating something beyond the mask that everyone else wears, a cloth or disposable mask. It's not like they're mandating like full face coverings or wrappings around no, they're following the public health policy. And based on, like, let's say they decide their gym doesn't have adequate air, movement. They decide, hey, you have to wear a mask in the gym too, the auditorium too, or whatever.
Well, I mean, like, in Providence, Rhode Island, for example, the Brown did not restrict students from gathering with more than a certain number of people in social settings because that was required of them by the public health authorities. That was on their own accord that they did it. And so they are going well beyond just what the normal policy is. So it's not a chicken or the egg thing. It's these colleges being far more extreme than could possibly be warranted, particularly in light of them already subjecting their student populations to mandatory vaccination. I mean, I keep coming back to this. It doesn't bother you at all that,
most of it
for some of the most influential sectors of society, the vaccine has done the opposite of enabling a return to normalcy. It's actually allowed for more monitoring.
I find the whole idea
more closures, more kind of scrutinization of basic social encounters.
I disagree.
That doesn't bother you at all?
I disagree with the whole return to normalcy line from the outcome, like from the get-go, though. Like, I don't understand this whole belief that there's going to be a return to normalcy. I know a lot of conspiracy theorists probably licking their lips right now, who think this is some great reset or whatever. But the fact of the matter is,
I've never used that term.
I'm not saying you have this. We are on YouTube and Rockfin, though, and they both have their communities who believe that type of stuff.
True.
I quite frankly think that when something at this level, and doesn't have to be a pandemic, we've seen it with all sorts of things, the idea that we're going to go back to life as we know it to be kind of like, babyish, like things at this level change everything. And I'm not saying we're going to be wearing masks for life and there's going to be a mandate to wear masks for life. I don't even think that's going to happen. But you will likely see people in the United States of America feel quite comfortable wearing masks out of their own volition and wanting to do so.
Which I don't have a problem with. I mean, if people want,
there are people who do. There are many people,
then go right ahead.
There are many people who do.
I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
But I just don't think this idea that everything will go back to February or March 2020 is something to aspire to, because it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Well, let's just dwell on that for a second. I actually think that's a crucial point, and that very nicely explicates a core kind of philosophical difference between us, which is that you don't even view it as an aspiration to seek to return to normalcy or to move beyond some sort of paradigm where COVID is dictating so much of our lives. Whereas I do think that is a defensible aspiration. Particularly if all it requires is viewing COVID with a sense of proportion and not pretending that it doesn't exist or something, but again, doing the recalibrating that so many people in positions of authority are unwilling to do. So I guess that you rejecting that as an aspirational hope and me affirming it, I think actually that does explain a lot about our.
Well, sure, because why wouldn't we learn from this whole thing? Like, why would we just throw away everything we've experienced in a year and a half out the window?
Wait, it's not a matter of not learning from things. You said that you didn't think it was warranted to seek to return to normalcy, or that you don't want to return to normalcy. I disagree. That doesn't preclude me from wanting to learn things about the past year and a half. It's me being very hypersensitive to intrusions into civil liberty, in particular, on the grounds of what people in positions of power claim is a permanent emergency situation long past the time that it actually constitutes any kind of cognizable emergency. I mean, how could an endemic disease be a constant emergency? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I don't think. I think eventually, what you're saying will happen. I personally don't think we're there yet. I don't think. Again, I told you from quite a while ago that I thought the messaging put out that a lot of people seem to have believed that everything would go back to normal as soon as the vaccines rolled out was a bizarre thing to put in the minds of people. I never thought that even before there was a vaccine. I thought that this would take much longer than people thought due to the fact that A, not everyone would be able to get the vaccine, B, not everyone would want to get the vaccine, and it would take, I don't know, maybe even another year or so for things to be able to be rolled back. And the problem here is that things were rolled back well before that. And now once you roll things back, you can't, people will have a problem reverting. The lockdowns we did in March and April, I mean, the numbers we're going to see in some states that we're seeing right now, they should probably lock down now and shouldn't have locked down back in March and April. I actually think that the countrywide lockdown back in like March and April was the wrong move because not every state was dealing with the same level of emergency that other states were. Should like New York and New Jersey have locked down then? Yeah, sure. But why did like states that barely even like had a blip quite yet lock down? I thought that was stupid. Those states should probably lock down. Like, Missouri should probably lock down, Alabama, states like that where they're seeing the pandemic at its worst. They already did the lockdown and they're not going to go back to that because the people already experienced it and they're not going to want to go back. So a lot of the policy that happens in terms of these lockdowns go by what people do or don't want to do.
Well, I mean, good luck locking down Missouri. I mean, I'm sure that will be politically very well received.
They did it in March in the early days of the pandemic. I mean, they probably were less locked down than some of the other states like New York and New Jersey.
You've conceded, as have I, that you're not an expert. So, I mean, have you consulted with expert opinions who are saying we must lock down, expert like opinion makers who also agree that we must lock down Missouri?
I mean, I'm not reporting on the issue. I'm giving you my opinion on it. If I put together a report, I certainly wouldn't publish it without the knowledge of experts. Like I wouldn't put out a piece telling people that we need to lock down Missouri right now. As a discussion we're having, I'm giving you my opinion on what I see based on what, when New York lockdown and comparatively what these states are going through now seems the closest that they're going to get. Maybe it'll even get closer based on how it's getting worse. But if I was to put together a piece beyond just what Matt Binder thinks, where I was making the case that this needs to happen based on the information that health officials have, then I would obviously quote such officials.
Okay, well, I mean, I think that's a hazy distinction. We're talking on a public platform. Everything that I say here is at least guided by the facts,
but it's not.
So it's a different format. But I mean, I think you're expressing it. So I mean, isn't that kind of arbitrary though? You're saying if you were expressing the opinion in print, therefore, then that would require you to somehow consult a formal expert opinion.
No, if I was doing a reported segment, a video segment on YouTube, then obviously I would go about getting experts. But again, I'm not going out there saying that Missouri needs to lock down right now. I'm saying, in my personal opinion, based on what Matt Binder, a non-expert, is seeing, it makes more sense for Missouri to have locked down now than when they did in March, or when the rest of the country, the whole country, did in March. Like, this is just like based on Missouri having worse COVID-19 cases, more COVID-19 cases right now than they did in March. I mean, this is not like late breaking stuff, but again, I would not go about making a reported segment video or reported piece or whatever. Like, this is just the same thing we're talking about right now. Before, you asked my opinion on something and I said, all right, I'll give you my opinion. But again, I'm not a health official, and I gave you my personal opinion based on, me having 2 kids, what I've seen in my own community. I can't give you beyond that really on those specific issues. If you
want to go to Missouri and publicly advocate for a lockdown, I volunteer to accompany you and report on that whole trip, because I would love to see how that is received. If you would go to, like, town hall meetings,
I've already told you that I agreed with the fact that it would never happen.
Oh, okay.
Like I told you something, like that was my whole premise. The fact is,
I know it was kind of a joke. I don't.
All right, but but the fact is, the premise that the whole conversation, well, this particular part of the conversation, is that I concede that there were many mistakes made, and one of it has to do with the fact that once you draw back a policy, and then the data and the changes, it's a lot harder to bring those policies back. And what I'm saying is that it was extremely stupid for some of these policies to have been drawn back, because it has created this atmosphere where people are now steadfast against certain things. I mean, you said it yourself. You were fine with wearing masks for quite a while. And I'm assuming you probably were no longer fine.
I still don't now. I don't view masks as a tyrannical imposition even now. I mean, if I'm on a plane or something, I'll wear it. I don't know that it's particularly effective at reducing transmission or what have you, but I'm not going to, flip out over it. I just, it's just a matter of my personal kind of disposition, I guess. But we should.
No, but when did your opinion on mask mandates change? Was it prior to the vaccines rolling out and the CDC?
Well, as I've said, my whole attitude changed radically upon mass provision of vaccines. And it's ironic to me that you are disputing that the vaccines could have enabled the return to normalcy, when that was the whole premise behind them. And I think they actually have achieved the goal that was connected to the return to normalcy, which is that they drastically reduce the likelihood that people who take the vaccine are going to have a severe health outcome. So, I'm not going to call you an anti-vaxxer. That would be histrionic. But I do think that you're articulating a logic that rejects the utility of vaccines in a way.
No, because
insofar as putting this behind us in a proportionate and sensible
manner. It seems like you don't understand what a contagious disease like the pandemic is.
Why is it now some kind of radical position to have viewed vaccines as a turning point in how we process this whole subject?
Vaccines were a huge turning point. I mean, that's why a lot of practically every restaurant, at least in New York City that I can see, is reopened, and people are now going back out. Broadway reopened, entertainment reopened. There's live shows, music venues, and clubs reopened here. And that's because we got
and yet we still have these little patches of elite society that are in a whole different mind frame, right?
Well, because the pandemic hasn't ended, man. Like, again, you keep bringing up vaccines as protecting.
So the pandemic hasn't ended, more or less, in a practical sense, for like a 20-year-old who is vaccinated. I mean, they have to be super worried.
I mean,
if in their mandatory surveillance testing result they come up technically as positive, and then they have to upend their life. I mean, that makes sense to you?
I mean,
for them, it actually should be over. Particularly,
that's not how it works, though. That's not how this works, though.
It is how it works, because the retort is always, but they could transmit to somebody vulnerable. Yeah, they could transmit to somebody who's vulnerable, who's had universal vaccine access for 8 months. I feel like I'm actually kind of going crazy in repeating that so often, but that was the whole point of vaccination, principally to protect the vulnerable. Not the majority suppress transmission, which is an impossibility with an endemic virus.
The majority of people who are dying are unvaccinated, so they don't have the vaccine protections like you. You're so focused on the fact
but they have the opportunity to get it, right?
All right,
we can't let our lives be dictated by 15% of holdouts or something.
Well, it's a lot more than 15%, but
not among the elderly. I mean, if you look even at the most red states, right?
Dude, the elderly aren't the only ones dying anymore. Like, where have you been for the past couple of months?
I mean, but age is hugely correlated.
Yes, and guess what? The elderly actually have the highest vaccination rate.
Right.
Which means these 2,000 a day deaths are no longer just the elderly, man. Like, make sense here. Like, if the elderly are the most vaccinated, yet we are actually reporting more COVID deaths now than we did months ago, then that means that common sense would dictate that we are now seeing deaths amongst people who are no longer those vulnerable elderly people.
You could find that data actually for yourself. And I've actually looked at some of it in Florida, for example. Over the summer, I don't have the average age off the top of my head, but it was older/elderly people who were unvaccinated who comprised the vast majority of the deaths. And even though in Florida, something like 90+% of all people age 65 or over are vaccinated, that 10% is still a lot of people and can still result in, a couple hundred deaths on a given day or something, or maybe not quite that much, but you know what I mean. And so like that actually, it just because
for the month of September so far, the majority of COVID deaths in the United States have been among people 50 to 64 years old. I wouldn't call those people elderly. 50 to 64.
They're older and they're in a risk group, sure. But I mean, and that's why they should get vaccinated. I don't disagree with that. I just don't agree I just don't agree that some 55-year-olds reluctant to get vaccinated in Missouri, thereby means that the entire country must live under a perpetual crisis regimen. I mean, how does that make any sense?
I mean, listen, I regularly hear from people who claim that, the left that is giddy for the unvaccinated people to die so they could like dunk on them online are disgusting. But you're like, here you are telling me that, you're fine with going with this, throwing all this stuff out the window because those dumbasses should be vaccinated by now. I mean,
I haven't called them dumbasses, and I would advocate trying to reason with them and encourage them to get it. So,
you've said yourself you've tried to do that.
I think certainly you have to recognize the limitations of these kind of like exhortations or these injunctions, and the limits of public policy to achieve universal 100% compliance with an intended outcome. I think if you don't recognize that limitation, then you're going to be stuck in this kind of purgatory of partial lockdown here and then intervention here there, and people are just going to get alienated and disenchanted, and rightly so, because so many of those interventions, as I've documented at college campuses, do not make sense.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like you look to me.
Are you really trying to tell me that because a 55-year-old in wherever may contract the disease and die, that justifies whatever capricious imposition that college administrators want to impose, even though down the street you can party to your heart's content unmasked? I mean, really?
Well, I mean, it's not some hypothetical random 50-year-old. I mean, I just told you that thousands of 50 to 60-year-olds died just this month from COVID. So those aren't hypotheticals; those are real people. It's easy just to talk about them as hypotheticals and just only 4,000 people this month in that age group died of COVID. But at the end of the day, those are 4,000 real people. But also, in speaking of college campuses specifically, I would also wager that a lot of this has to do with, the regular legality issues that they are also weary about in terms of being responsible for mass outbreaks and the few breakthrough cases where one of their students or one of their faculty members would get very sick and possibly die.
All right. Well, I guess we should probably wrap up.
Right.
One more thing
though before we move on to something or wrap up though, that really is sort of I wanted to touch upon because it's really sort of baffled me. You keep bringing up that you hear from so many students who are trying to fight these like tyrannical administrations who are forcing.
I mean, it's usually not as hyperbolic as that. It's them. It's not. They're not screaming that they're being
right.
tyrannized.
So your well, it seems like your pet issue here is,
although actually a few of them did say that at Connecticut College because that was the most extreme lockdown in the U.S. But by and large, they don't use that kind of exaggerated.
Sure.
terminology.
Your pet peeve here, it seems, is that the administrative not listening to their students when it comes to the college campus issue. I know you extrapolate to larger things that can possibly come off of college campuses, which I don't agree with in these specific scenarios, but in terms of your reporting on college campus issues, you don't like the fact that these administrations are telling students how to behave or how to live their life. Which is, it's weird because you also, when I look at your online accounts, you do the same reporting on college campuses that don't have these active measures on COVID, whose students are actually advocating for their colleges to do something about it. But instead of taking the side of the average citizen, in this case, the college student, you also poo-poo the college student for asking for the college to do something about the health issues on the campus. That seems to go against your what you're saying here. Like,
no. I mean, I never thought that at Connecticut College, for example, that the grievances I was hearing from a segment of students was the majoritarian view. It wasn't a matter of me, discerning that somehow 51% didn't want the restrictions and therefore it was justified to report on it. It was trying to represent a view that otherwise would have been stifled given the snitch culture there, which is incredibly pervasive, and other factors which had kind of prevented any kind of robust debate there. I'm not sure what specifically you're referring to, but there have been cases where I was looking at Amherst College today, and I was reading the student newspaper, and there was an instance of somebody writing a column, because Amherst College, I mean, is people actually have to walk around wearing lanyards on college campus because on the campus because they're not allowed to have any visitors. And they have to get a special permission to travel, and on and on and on, right? And so I was reading the campus newspaper, and there was somebody who wrote an opinion column on how it was the headline was it's ableist to aspire to a return to normalcy. So they may actually agree with you, and I thought that was actually indicative of part of the mentality that drives the perpetuation of a lot of these, what I would say are nonsensical policies at this point. So, I mean, it doesn't mean I obviously have a position on this stuff now. And so it's not a matter of me just being a vehicle for whatever the majority view is on a given campus. But I think there is actually some value in giving representation to at least a substantial faction of students who otherwise would not get their grievances aired or not have their positions expressed in any public venue.
I mean, it seems to be more than just one or two schools, which makes me believe that I'm looking through your Twitter account right example? Now. There's Fairfield University. I know that's probably sure. And then Amherst, like you said, and then there was another school. I don't have it in front of me right now. I recall you posting where they were doing actual on the ground activism, where they were doing a demonstration.
Oh yeah. That was at University of Iowa, where students held a die-in to demand that there be a mask mandate imposed. I found that notable.
Right. But my question, my point here is that you go out of your way to share the opinion of a few students who, which is fine if that's what you want to do. If a few students who
you say a few, but I mean, I'll try. Maybe I should go through and quantify it so you have a better
idea. A handful of students, dozens of students who reached out to you and said that they are going against their administration. And you went out there and you put your
they weren't going against the administration. They couldn't. They were being stifled from doing so because they would face disciplinary sanction.
Sure.
Or they would be ratted out by their students because these administrators have instituted these policies that incentivize snitching, which is actually another threat to civil liberty, maybe in a less formal way. But I think snitch culture is actually inimical to any kind of free exchange.
All right. I mean, I'm not, again, this is that we could go a whole nother way there, but I'm focusing on this because this is part of the overall conversation, which is your reporting on the matter. I don't understand why you don't treat those other students who seem to be, at the very least, in the same or at least equal, close to equal numbers of students who are going against the health mandates on college campuses. Why don't you treat those other students at colleges that where they are going against their administration by saying, we want you to do something for our health and institute some sort of policies to protect the people on this campus? Why you aren't going with them and reporting on them with the same rigor? Like, why you're not taking them seriously, or fighting for their right to have their voices heard, and for the college campus to maybe meet them in the middle somewhere so they too can feel safe, or to live the college campus life that they want to live.
Well, maybe I should hire you as an assignment editor, because I actually would find it interesting to go to like University of Iowa, for example, and talk to a healthy selection of these students who are demanding to be more aggressively surveilled by the administrators. I mean, I think that actually would be an interesting concept to go report out a little more. So, I don't deny.
I
wouldn't deny the value in doing it. I mean, but this isn't
all surveillance. This isn't all surveillance. But I'm not even saying you have to go out and do this reporting. I just don't understand why you bring this stuff online and write them off and give them snarky comments and like mock that this is what they want. Like, oh, they want to be, they want Big Brother to watch them or whatever. But you don't go ahead and say that, like, oh, I'm just using examples, Michael. Like I said, if I had the time, if this wasn't something that was put together in a few hours, I would have gotten quotes and things like that, but I didn't have the time to do that. But I do know, and you are agreeing, as far as I can see, that I think you can agree with this, if you haven't already, that you have without a doubt in your commentary on social platforms have treated students who are asking for the health measures to happen on campuses where there are not adequate health measures quite differently from students who you side with personally, who are asking for health measures to be rolled back on campuses where there are strong health measures. I mean, if the idea is that these students should be listened to and administration should not discount all these students and should listen to what they have to say and see if it makes sense and try to work something out for the safety and health and experience of all the students on the campus, I don't know why you go with one group of students and say, oh, the tyrannical system is holding them down, and the other set of students, you're sort of like, oh, they want mommy and daddy to walk their hands on the college campus. Again, not quoting you, but that's the gist of how you look at student set A and student set B.
Well, I mean, I've been totally transparent that I reject this whole concept of an endless emergency for reasons that I've spelled out at this point ad nauseum. And so, yeah, when there are students who take the view that they are in favor of a permanent emergency and in favor of policy interventions pursuant to this whole notion of a permanent emergency existing, I'm going to disagree with them. And I don't think that when I posted the photo on Twitter of the University of Iowa students protesting, I don't think I was overly mocking of them. I mean, I think it was probably clear that I don't agree with them, and I think that they are actually, part of this whole, fueling this whole mindset around the entrenchment of permanent emergency conditions, which I think are undesirable for X, Y, and Z reason. But I'd be perfectly interested to actually talk to them on a more face-to-face level. If anybody wants to contact me, please do so. But for the past 2 weeks, what I've by happenstance gotten involved in is students with the other view who don't get an airing in a lot of places, and I'm comfortable, given limited resources, with having done that. But I don't discount the contrary viewpoint as being worth probing.
Well, good. That's good to hear, because I'm sure students, if they listen to this at the other schools, might reach out to you then and talk to you about it. Because
I welcome it.
If I was a student who saw your reporting and saw
at Connecticut College, I mean, I actually did. I mean,
the majority of students seem to have not agreed with you from the videos. I wasn't there.
There was it. I mean, I've written and acknowledged that there was a vocal faction of students who didn't agree with me and didn't even want to hear me. I mean, I got I got pelted with 2 eggs. So yeah, there were some who didn't like me at all. Although, I mean, you'll be glad to know that both eggs missed, even the one that was fired at point blank range. So yeah, I mean, that didn't leave any mystery as to whether there was a faction of students who disliked me or didn't agree with me. But even amongst some who didn't agree with me and who favored the administration perspective, right? I was actually very pleased that I was able to speak to them in a reasoned, calm manner, and we had a fruitful exchange. Not in all cases, obviously, there were some that were not, but there were some that were. So, I mean, I'm always willing to have a dialogue. I'm having a dialogue with you right now for over 2 hours.
Hey, I think this has been quite a good dialogue. I mean, yeah, I think we've done exactly what you claim that went well with these students at Connecticut College. I mean, maybe they would have, maybe those students that threw those 2 eggs or tried to pelt you with those 2 eggs, maybe they would have hit you if they weren't wearing those masks. So maybe it worked out in your favor.
Yeah.
Maybe it prohibited their athletic prowess.
Yeah, no, or if they hadn't
maybe they couldn't breathe correctly.
If they hadn't been locked down, and they could have gone to Little League practice and actually honed their aim a little bit more.
Right, dang us. Maybe it worked out for the best.
I mean, the girl who tried to pelt me at point blank range, I actually felt a little bad for. I mean, that was kind of embarrassing. But she'll get over it.
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, this has been, I thought, a good conversation. I don't agree with you, and I don't think you agree with me. Yeah. But if this was helpful,
can I ask you? I mean, I agree that it was I think a constructive conversation. People might differ if they've been watching it this entire time, but in my opinion, it was. I guess just as a closing question, what I'd ask you goes back to the original impetus for this conversation, which is that do you still think that the only reason I could possibly take an interest in these issues is because I have some creepy infatuation or I'm trying to relive the glory days of my exploits in school, 12 years ago?
Well, I can attest that I don't think that the secondary one fits you after speaking with you. Maybe you didn't have such a good college experience. I don't know, but
it was fine. It's just I'm not trying to relive it. I'm good with where I am now.
But I do think, based upon your audience, that you are pursuing this. You're pursuing this because it is attractive to this a specific niche of an audience that you've carved out. I mean,
so the whole rationale that I just spent 2 hours trying to articulate that has nothing to do with what my audience may or may not think and how you define my audience. I'm not even sure. Like that whole rationale, you just don't accept.
No, I think people contacted you because they know that they knew to contact you and not other people because they knew where your opinion would lie, quite frankly, which is fine. That's usually, that's how it works. You go to someone that you trust when you want something written, of course. So they trusted you with the story. I believe you decided that this was something to pursue based upon, obviously you went down to this college, and you didn't think it was
why are we going back to the whole kind of litigation of my theoretical motive? I don't understand. The question I asked to you was, do you still think that the only reason I could have taken an interest in this subject and sought to report on it is because I have a creepy infatuation with colleges? I mean, that was the whole idea behind the
First of all, I just want to also,
and the impetus for this conversation. So, do you still think that or not?
I just want to be clear, because I know this came up with other people's tweets. For example, Glenn Greenwald. I never used the word creepy personally. But in terms of,
and you personally did. I have this weird,
I did say you have a weird, logical motive. There's nothing there that insinuates any sort of weird sexual perversion that
I appreciate
other people try to. Very much. No, because I think that's what you're going at now, and I think that's also. I think you can also. I think it would be fair.
I don't know who writes the titles of the videos on the Majority Report,
but also creepy.
Maybe you do. But it asserts that I have a creepy infatuation with college campus.
But I also think creepy doesn't mean anything sexualized to begin with in general.
And then your co-panelists, including Emma, say that I was concerned about it because my girlfriend goes to college.
Well,
I don't know how she knows that. I mean, not true, by the way. I mean, not that it matters.
I never said anything about it. You can even go back and rewind the tape.
That was in the segment.
You should have Emma on. You should reach out to Emma and talk with her.
I'd love to. We actually used to get. I mean, we both worked at the Young Turks. We got along very well. I actually also interviewed Brandon on the Young Turks, and now he's. I'm a right-wing grifter, supposedly, according to him. So, whatever. But I get along with both, particularly Emma, because I worked with her. I got along with her perfectly well. And now she's gossiping about my girlfriend on YouTube, which is, strange.
Again, it's a reference to the green. But again, I'm not gonna listen. I don't want to talk about what other people said. I'm in the video title with creepy. I just want to make it clear. Weird, obsessive, those are words that I definitely used. None of those have any sort of sexual or weird fetishized notations.
All right. Well, I'm very grateful you clarified that.
Well, I would never do such a thing, to be quite frank, because I think it would not work in my favor in pointing out the ridiculousness of some of these things. It would not work. I have better arguments to make. Let's put it that way. But I do think that, it's not just the college reporting. I have followed your work. Like I said, I've known who you are since the Occupy Wall Street days. You have definitely moved in a different direction altogether, which people change. I get that. But you have definitely formed a very specific type of audience, one that's often found on websites and platforms like Substack or Rockfin, which again, fine, everyone has their own platforms that speak to a certain type of audience. But there's definitely been a distinct move from you, and is it all?
I kind of contest the idea that I've deliberately moved. You'd have to cite more specific examples, which you don't have to get into now. Maybe we can do a part 2. We can do a whole character study of me. But I would just note that, and I actually mentioned this to some of the Connecticut college students who were, echoing some of the Majority Report, attacks, in that I was just this right-wing grifter who was, an operative of Tucker or something. And I just let them know that I spent the whole previous month fighting with Trump supporters and
right. I do think
about Afghanistan, and I fought with them over over all kinds of stuff. So I think there is an oversimplification here, but I guess you're entitled to your own.
I do think it's weird to go on a show like Tucker Carlson's. Let me finish, because I don't want anyone to interrupt and take that. Let me put this first. I am actually not one of those people who say, don't go on Fox News, don't go on so-and-so show. I actually advocate for you to go on, for anyone who has the ability to go on any show on any network and not, quite frankly, give them exactly what you could hear from every other pundit. I personally, if I was invited to go on Tucker Carlson's show, I would accept in a heartbeat, and I would I wouldn't blow up the show. I wouldn't disrupt it, but whatever the topic was, I would make sure I wasn't just going on to give the same opinion that, Tucker Carlson can get from any one of his dozen or so usual right-wing guests. It's just like, Glenn Greenwald, for example, goes on Tucker Carlson's show, which is great. And he has a number of great civil libertarian issues he can talk about and shine a light to on that show. Same with Jimmy Dore. He goes on Tucker Carlson's show, and they shoot the shit with Tucker and make Tucker laugh, which is like not at all what I would go on that show to do. Like, I would challenge Tucker's audience, give them a perspective they don't usually hear. And I don't know. I just don't know why you or Jimmy Dore or Glenn Greenwald wouldn't use that.
I don't know how many of my Tucker appearances you've watched. Not that I would expect you to watch them all scrupulously or anything, but there have been many times where I've done exactly that. One of the very I've actually criticized Fox News and Donald Trump on Tucker's show. So I don't know what more you want of me. These segments go by in like microsecond often, because they're so truncated. But the last time before this week that I was on in September, or in August rather, it was on the Afghanistan subject. And I was essentially defending, Joe Biden, and I don't know. That's a typical thing that the Tucker audience wants. So I don't know what you're basing this off that I never.
Well, I'm basing it off
anything.
of the segment that we did with you on Tucker Carlson show.
All right. Well, that was one of dozens. So I mean,
right. I mean, I frankly, I'm just saying that, you know, it's weird to not use that sort of
because I'm asked to go on to discuss a particular topic, and you have at most like 4 minutes.
Well, I mean, you tell me right now that you advocate for people to get vaccinated. I thought that would be a great opportunity to tell people, hey, we want to get rid of these dumb mask mandates. Your audience should get vaccinated.
I was on actually the long form Tucker interview style show over the summer, and I did say that I got vaccinated there. So I mean,
that's great, but you know,
well, thank you so much.
That I agree, but we also know that that's not really the one that most people are watching.
All right. Well, I mean, I've been on a audio visual medium with Tucker and stated that I got vaccinated when we were discussing the issue of vaccination. So,
right.
I mean, I feel like I feel like on this, you could just never win because so many people just have this instinctive reaction to the very fact of you appearing on Tucker. And there's nothing you can say that's going to dissuade, you know.
No, because I just told you that I love it. I mean, I've recently talked with you. I've debated the Convo Couch people who are like big in the Jimmy Dore world, and some of them. One of those people is an anti-vaxxer, and you know, I've debated, like, I am all for, and I went on their program, by the way. I'm all for going on any program, right wing.
Well, that we agree on.
I went on I could go down the list of shows I've appeared on with right wingers. I'm totally open to it, but I mean, listen, and I see people in the chat bringing up MSNBC. If you go on MSNBC and just talk about how great Joe Biden is, I think you're completely throwing away a real opportunity to challenge that audience.
Well, I mean, I've never gone on Fox and just talked about how great Trump or any Republican is. I mean, I've never done that in the inverse. So, I mean, of course, I wouldn't do that on MSNBC either. So I guess
again, I'm not talking about specifically you, and we're talking generally right now. I brought
you were talking specifically about me.
Specifically about you in terms of your recent appearance on Tucker Carlson. But again, I'm not going to say you've never gone on a Fox program, digital or otherwise, and say you never just said, like, I don't agree with Trump. I mean, that's not what I'm saying.
All right. Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying, but I think that's kind of a tangential.
Yeah, we could get more into it. We don't have the time to get too into
it. Yeah. Well, if you'd like, we could do it again sometime. We can.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you again in the future. This was, I thought this was good. I mean, I do think you have a habit of going on for a little bit and cutting people off, but I'm fine with it. I'm fine. I'm understandable.
Well, I mean, I hope I didn't cut you off too much, and I think you spoke. I think you spoke quite a bit. Maybe I do have that habit, but hopefully it wasn't too burdensome.
No, I'm fine. What better way to spend a Friday night? Right?
I know. That I totally agree with. I mean, I'm having a ball. All right. So actually, we're going to end this now, but I'm going to go exclusively to Rockfin if I can figure out the technical aspect of this. Once Matt leaves, and do like a brief kind of post game type thing.
Sure, yeah.
For the Rockfin people. All right,
cool. I'm gonna grab this and upload it to my YouTube channel. We discussed that was cool, and yeah. All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Michael, for having me. I look forward to more fruitful conversations with you in the future.
Okay, very good. And if it was a fruitful conversation, then I feel like we accomplished something.
I think it laid some very things bare, which is important when we're discussing these things.
All right. Take care.